As you know, if you've been paying attention to the news or social media, or even in conversations with friends, you know that we are living in some very dark and difficult days, the likes of which we've never seen before. On top of a raging pandemic that has infected over 107 million people, and over 236 million people have died worldwide. We are living in some precarious times. When we zero in on that number, when we look at America, there are over 27 million people that have been infected by the coronavirus, and well over 500,000 people that have unfortunately experienced an untimely death. These certainly are perilous times. I personally know the effects of the virus because I had a church friend of mine from Philadelphia, where I'm from Philadelphia, pass away because of the coronavirus a couple months ago. She was only 35. And with so many untimely deaths in our world, there is hope because people are getting vaccinated day by day, and thousands of people across the country are receiving a vaccine. And even though states have fumbled the rollout process, progress is being made. However, we're still dealing with racism, sexism, ageism, classism, xenophobia, and other forms of oppression that we have to deal with and talk about. In addition to some of those social justice issues I have named, I believe that the preeminent social justice issue of our time is climate change. Climate change is a change in the Earth's long-term global temperatures and weather pattern. The planet is in great state of distress because of climate change. The climate crisis represents an urgent and existential threat to civilization, with an international consensus of scientists agreeing that humanity must drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 45% in 2030 and reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050 if the world is going to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius without endangering the existence of humans and other ecosystems. From shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to the rising sea level that increase the risks of catastrophic flooding, the impacts of climate change are global in scope and unprecedented in scale. The effects are devastating in nature and dangerous in reality. Climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we, my sisters and brothers, are at a defining moment. If human beings don't take drastic action now, adapting to these impacts in the future will be more challenging and costly. And that's really where I want to begin and delve deeper into the work that we do at the communities responding to extreme weather. I am going to deal with climate impacts in Boston and the greater Boston area. Then I'm going to move to the Metro West. I'm going to start with who we are, what we do. Then we're going to talk about climate impacts in the greater Boston area, which includes parts of the Metro West. Then we're going to move to Metro West and Pacific climate impacts to the Metro, to Framingham and the other cities in the Metro West. And then we will delve into a poll, and then we'll get into a Q&A, and we will try not to bore your patience, if you will. So the communities responding to extreme weather. What we focus on is helping people adapt to the impacts of climate change. When we talk about impacts, we're talking about extreme heat, flooding, sea level rise, and those are just particular impacts here in the New England area. In other parts of the country, they're dealing with increased hurricane, tornadoes, etc. However, to describe and articulate our organizational setting, the C.R.E.W program, that's an acronym for Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, is nestled under the organizational umbrella of the Better Future Project. And the mission of the Better Future Project is working to build a powerful grass movement to address the climate crisis and advance a rapid and responsible transition beyond coal, oil, and gas towards a renewable energy for all. There are 3 programs under this, under the Better Future Project: 350 Mass, and I see that we have some people here from 350 Mass, Divest Ed, and C.R.E.W. Each program has a different focus. C.R.E.W. is the youngest program, started in 2018, so about 3 years old. I've had the privilege of being with the program for almost 2 years now. And you see that what the mission statement is here for the Better Future Project. So I'm going to focus on the mission of C.R.E.W. C.R.E.W. is, as mentioned earlier, is a grassroots organization that aims to build equitable, inclusive neighborhood climate resilience in New England through hands-on education, service, and planning. We will delve into that a little bit more. So, if we were in a room, I would ask you to look at your neighbor and or I would ask you to, shout out one by one in an orderly manner. What are some of the extreme weather impacts that we are expected to see in New England and that we're seeing in New England? But because we're not in the same room and we're in virtual space together, it would be a little chaotic for people to, just shout out what are some of the impacts. So what we're going to do, we're just going to go right into it. So one of the impacts that we are seeing in the area is heat. I think what we're going to do, and matter of fact, I know what we're going to do. I'm going to share an article that was in the WBUR, and for the folks who are here, and perhaps for the folks that are registered, we can send that out. And it talks about extreme heat. Before I get into this chart, there was the Museum of Science in Boston received a grant from federal government, I believe, to measure the temperatures at different points in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening in the city of Boston. Also, the city of Worcester did a study, and a few other cities across the country, and maybe Brookline as well. Those are the 3 cities in Massachusetts, and there were several other cities or institutions in cities that received the grant to do a heat mapping project. And one of the results, and again, we'll share the articles. One of the results from the study, or one of the results from the findings, is that Boston is expected to feel like Alabama by 2100 if we don't slow down the climate crisis. But even if we were to slow down the climate crisis, we will be dealing with decades of extreme weather. So follow me, if you will, and let us delve into the chart here. So we have a few different time frames. Let's start with the 1971 to 2000 time frame. We see that there were essentially 11 days of extreme heat. However, when we see the time frame that we're living in right now, 2015 to 2044, we can see that there's an increase. It went from 11 days of temperature over 90 degrees to 31 days of temperature of 90 degrees. And I want to backtrack for a second. We know that extreme heat is dangerous to people. And in fact, in 1995, there were 739 people that were killed in Chicago because of the deadly heat wave. So we know that when there is extreme heat, those who live in frontline communities are even more vulnerable. We know that elderlies are more vulnerable. We know people with certain underlying conditions are vulnerable, or perhaps even some children are vulnerable. So we know that there's a level of vulnerability that folks have to extreme heat. And when we think about the impact on communities of color, we think about folks who live in communities of low wealth and low income, who may feel that, or who may, because of their budget constraints, not afford an AC, but have a fan in their quarters. Well, the reality of it is that fans will not cool you down. Matter of fact, it just makes indoor temperature even hotter in some cases. So, people think that a fan will cool them down, but the fan is just circulating the hot air and making a person and can make a person even hotter. So we know that when heat waves happen, people unfortunately die. In fact, there was a report that came out that said the last 6 years with the last 5 years with the hottest temperature in human history. And we know that these extreme weather events will continue to continue happening with more regularity. We know that heat will continue to get hotter, and the days will become more hotter frequently because of climate change and because of the damage that has already been done to planet Earth. So we see here that there's a great increase from 11 days from 71 to 2000. We see predicted here from 2015 of 2044, 31 days. And check this out, y'all. From 2055 to 2084, there's over 60 days of hot weather. This is atrocious. We must recognize and realize that in the Northeast, summertime is only for 90 days. So we're looking at from 2055 to 2084, that over 60 days of extreme heat. And this is disastrous and this is dangerous. So we know that extreme heat will continue to come. Now, a lot of it depends on tipping points. And at the worst of the tipping points, and I'm sorry that you hear the background noise, but at the worst of the tipping points, New England, Boston, and the rest of New England, and the rest of the world, but in different ways, we'll see more extreme heat, more rain and snow. So y'all see this 55% number here. You see these different numbers from 1958 to 2016. And really what that means is that communities in the greater Boston are going to have seen an increase in the biggest winter storm and spring storms. This is because warmer air holds more moisture. So when it does rain or snow, the events will be stronger. In the last 50 years, 58 to 1958, in the last 50 years overall, actually, we've seen the amount of rain that drops in the very strongest storm, 1% of the biggest each year, go up by 55%. So we know that more rain and more snow are going to come. And we've just, shared some facts with you all. So I want to share some impacts about Framingham. So I'm going to share some insight from the MVP program. The MVP is a state-ran program that provides funding to municipal cities to evaluate their vulnerability and how vulnerable their cities are to extreme weather. So MVP is Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness. Okay, so I'm going to read to you, and I'm going to share with you some of the vulnerabilities that was found in Framingham. So in 2018, the city of Framingham was awarded $44,500 in the MVP grant to fund the planning stage of the MVP process. And the funds were used to assess climate change impacts on vector-borne diseases. The city partnered with the Fuss O'Neill, a state-certified MVP provider, to complete a comprehensive baseline climate change and natural hazard vulnerability assessment and develop a list of priority actions for the city. The process involved a project kickoff meeting in December of 2018, attended by some members who later developed into an MVP core team, community members, who then met in January 2019 to determine the initial concerns and work to identify stakeholders within the municipality and set goals for the process. So I'm just going to share with you some of the findings from the process of Metro West. So one of the concerns is that flooding is a severe hazard that frequently affects the city of Framingham. The city has been experiencing the increasing regularity of storms with the so-called 10 and 100 years storm somehow now happening on an annual or near annual basis. And intense storms Intense storms occurring throughout the year are producing very high volumes of rain, causing rivers and storms and streams to overflow their banks, pitting significant pressures on dams, culverts, and other draining infrastructure, and overwhelming the stormwater infrastructure system. Flooding frequently has citywide impacts, including road closure at susceptible locations such as the Route 9/126 intersection, where cars have been known to become struck in floodwater on many occasions. During one recent summer, workshop participant described this happening 3 times in 2 weeks. Because of the high degree of impervious surfaces in the city, even moderate volumes of stormwater in Framingham can result in a stormwater runoff that floods buildings and infrastructure. One last thing I'll note, around 2003 in Framingham, there was a flood that overtopped a head wall and caused damage to approximately a dozen homes. Certain neighborhoods are particularly susceptible to flooding related to power outages. We know that flooding also poses a direct safety concern and related challenges for city emergency management team. Emergency personnel have been trying to get training for swift water rescue, which is presently a weakness on their team and an issue of increasing concern, given the increased frequency of flooding. So I'm going to put a pin right there, and I'm going to come back to the PowerPoint. So this is Cambridge, around Kendall's MIT area, where MIT is, and the Kendall train station. So all this purple is stormwater runoff by 2070. So we see that parts of Cambridge, and I live in Cambridge, parts of Cambridge will be flooded by 2070 or consistently flooded because of the stormwater runoff. When we think about Boston, for an example, when you see this blue area, this is by 2030. You can see, and just if you haven't known, Boston is a city that's on a lot of landfill. So we see here that the parts of the blue area represent, this is by 2030, represents flooding, coastal flooding and sea level rise. Then we see by 2050, we see that there are more blue and there more flooding. And you can see this is the Boston Commons here. And then by 2070, you see certain neighborhoods will be underwater. Back Bay, for an example, the Seaport District in South Boston, parts of Dorchester and Roxbury, particularly parts of Dorchester flood often, which is the E&J community. So we see that there is a problem in Massachusetts, and I just focused on 3 cities, Cambridge, Framingham, and Boston. The effects look differently, but the problem is the same. And we know that this flooding and stormwater runoff will continue to happen because climate change has been happening since the Industrial Revolution. I'm not going to focus too much on hurricanes. I want to talk a little bit about because here in Massachusetts, we see some, but we don't see a lot, and there may be some more that are coming. But I want to talk about the social and psychological impacts that we expect to see because of extreme heat, extreme flooding, particularly for Framingham. We see that, extreme flooding is a problem. So there are some psychological effects that happen because of extreme weather events. So I want to take Hurricane Katrina for an example. Up to 55% of adults and 45% of children suffered depression after the natural disaster, 49% of Hurricane Katrina survivors develop an anxiety or mood disorder. 1 in 6 develop PTSD. Suicide and suicidal ideation have more than doubled. I also want to talk about the global impact for a second. Outside the United States, the suicides of 60,000 India farmers over the past 3 decades have been directly linked to climate change. And this is an issue because it affects their well-being, their livelihood. And folks in in India is agricultural society in a lot of cities, and that's where a lot of livelihood comes from for people. Uh, an increase of 5 degrees Celsius, 9 degrees Fahrenheit on any given day was linked to 335 deaths. This is atrocious. So I want to talk about the crumbling community effect. See, climate change affects the way we think about ourselves, each other, and the world. After a climate event resulting in displacement, which we refer to as climate mitigation, people may experience a diminished sense of self, difficulty relating to others, diminished social interaction, and nostalgia, the loss of sense of place, solace, and security tied to one's physical environment. Community impacts include domestic abuse, child abuse, and violence, for an example, assault, and civil conflict. Economical insecurity and physical damage are a potential effect. So we see that there is a connection between the rise of violence and climate impacts. We see that domestic abuse goes up, child abuse, and other violence goes up because people become stressed out because their homes are destroyed and they're angry. They don't know exactly who to be angry at. And if we look at Hurricane Katrina, going back to that, we saw, sisters and brothers, we saw that the Ninth Ward was literally destroyed and had to be rebuilt. And people had to move to other places because their homes were destroyed. We saw, if you remember, in 2018, Hurricane Harvey, it flooded Houston and homes were destroyed. And people had to go into the one big church down there, Lakewood, and the furniture stores and the professional basketball stadium to find solace. So we understand that there is a relationship between being from some people from being totally stressed out because of nostalgia and taking it out on those who are closest to you, whether a child or partner, etc. So what does C.R.E.W do about this? That's what you've been asking. So we have diagnosed the problem and we understand what it is. We have recognized what the problem is and we understand what it is. Well, what C.R.E.W does is we try to help. There's a couple things. So remember our model: education, service, and planning. So what we've tried to do, folks, we try to build community teams. So we believe the best way to become climate resilient is through social resiliency. And we try to develop neighborhood teams, and we work with local organizations. We call them affiliate teams of residents coming together who are interested in building genuine relationships one with another and also with the greater community to be able to check in. They not only to have the relationship with each other as neighbors, but also to check in on the most vulnerable in the community. Now, COVID has made this a little bit hard because people cannot meet in person, i.e., we cannot meet in person. We're here virtually. But thankfully, there is technology where people still can connect. But often it's hard for people to develop really deep relationships one with another through virtual means. So we have this component of our program, and we have a team in Somerville / Cambridge, and we're interested in building other teams. If folks on this call are interested in learning more about starting an affiliate C.R.E.W team in their community, let me know. Please reach out. Happy to talk with you and help share some steps with you in order to make that happen. But really the purpose of the community team is for neighbors to not only be connected with neighbors, but also within a localized community, get a sense of who is the elderly or who is the most vulnerable in the community, and really build those relationships. So when the extreme heat does happen, and let's say it's that mother that lives or that grandmother that lives by herself, she's an empty nester. We want to ensure that her chances of survivability are high because she has her neighbors checking in with her. Now, I know New England is somewhat a cold place in terms of people's disposition in some neighborhoods. But for me, growing up in Philadelphia, all my neighbors knew each other on my street block. We knew each other. We knew each other's names. And that culture is still like that in Philadelphia, where folks know each other's names, folks communicate with each other, uh, folks have dialogue one with another. And when I moved to New England, you know, and I lived in several cities in Massachusetts, I didn't really see that present. So that's what we're trying to do with community teams. Um, we also have resiliency hubs. We have over 50 total resiliency hubs, including several different faith communities. We have partnership with the Mass Autobahn. We have Framingham Public Library, I believe, is the hub of ours that we work with and that we're glad to work with. We have one in Ontario, Canada, and our hub program is a institution that has a community institution that has a building that is interested, and the folks part of that organization are interested in sharing material around climate preparedness. That crew shares and sends to that hub, to those hubs. Um, and, we have several different PDFs around certain preparedness, like recognizing what heat waves are, or heat strokes, and recognizing frostbite, et cetera. So we're really excited about this portion of our program. And the hubs and you can go to our website and see more. But the hubs is a really booming program where it's another way to engage people around climate preparedness, and also educating people about climate impact. So remember, I mentioned a little earlier that our motto is education, service, and planning. We also had the opportunity last summer, the end of last summer, to give out air conditioning unit to low-income residents in Brockton. We received a generous grant, and that was tied to buying AC units, and we were able to give 94 AC units that we purchased, and we were able to provide those to frontline communities and those who are most vulnerable in the Brockton community. We hope to resume that project soon again, and we hope it to be an ongoing project. And that's part of our service, because we want to make sure that those who are low income and low wealth in frontline communities certainly have AC. And just so you know that the ACs were energy efficient, so it doesn't drive up their electricity bill. Hub level. And to be at the hub level is really to display a climate resilient hub window decal that crew provides. Make climate emergency preparedness information, again, that we talked about, that crew provides and sends to that hub, and host at least a yearly or more event related to climate preparedness. So it is with that in mind, that is some of what we do. And I have one other additional thought before we get into our question. One thing that I forgot to mention, not that I forgot, but I wanted to mention. We also help on an individual preparedness tip. We show people how to make preparedness kits. I'm gonna pull that slide up, and I'm gonna show it to you. Before the flood. So before the flood, I want to talk a little bit more about this. Make an emergency plan. Build an emergency preparedness kit. I'll show you that in a minute. Put electronics and important documents on high shelves. Sign up for Code Red or Code Blue. Or Code Red, or if you're in Boston, Alert Boston. Charge devices and backup batteries. Clear gutters, downspouts, and drains. Buy flood insurance if it's offered in your area. During the flood, evacuate immediately if told to do so. Don't walk or drive through a flooded streets. Turn around, don't drown. Turn around, don't drown. That sounds like a rhyme. Turn around, don't drown. Listen to the weather radios and emergency notifications on Code Red. If your building is flooded, go to the highest level, or if necessary, the roof. Never climb into a closed attic. That's no, because you'll get closed in with water. Then after the flood, Listen to instructions from authorities. Avoid driving unless it's an emergency. Wear heavy boots and gloves outside. Do not touch wet electrical equipment. If it is safe to do so, shut off electricity. Check on your neighbors if safe to do so. Stay out of flood waters. Never use a generator inside. And this is when we talked about a disaster kit, but I want to go back to heat for a second. So that was the preparing for the flood, during, after, and before. So I want to talk a little bit about preparing for heat. So if you know a heat wave is coming, cover windows with drapes, shades, or aluminum foil covered cardboard. Find cool places in your community. Like for an example, a library. And a library is normally open from 9 to 5, 8 to 4. During the height of the day, that's when the library is open. Now, virtually, during this pandemic, it's a little different, but, perhaps after the pandemic, libraries will resume going back to how they operated before. And, a library is an example of a cooling place. So for those who don't have an AC and struggling with it, maybe you could go, and maybe someone here can tell us, maybe the hours of operation, how it was before the pandemic, and maybe what the hours of operation would be after the pandemic. Because I'm not exactly sure how many libraries are in. I'm not sure how many libraries are in Framingham, but maybe we can get to that. But normally libraries are a cool place. Never leave a child, adult, or animal alone inside a car on a warm day. Again, some of these are just common sense tips, but we just want to just share them. Avoid exercise. Wear loose, lightweight, light colored clothing. Check in on your neighbors. All right. We talked about before the flood, during the flood, after the flood. Making a plan. So we oftentimes have like a book bag, an emergency preparedness book bag. So I want to show y'all. So you can get a standard book bag, standard book bag. And so this is stuff you want to have in case, when a flooding. If you're on medication, maybe have a 7-day pill count. Y'all see that. So you can have your medicine organized. You want to have a first aid kit. That just in case, anything happens during this flood, you want to make sure you have a first aid kit. And I'll pull out the rest of the items in a second, but the purpose of this is, imagine a situation where you're waiting for the rescue squad, 911, to get to you, and maybe a while. Well, if you have your book bag, you will just be ready to grab and go without a lot of scrambling. So it's important to have an emergency preparedness kit. So we talked about, if you're on medication, have a pill count, a first aid kit, a flashlight, in case all your power goes out. And again, it might be a while, you want to have a flashlight. You want to have batteries, obviously. You want to have, hygiene kit. This is for males. This is for females. However you identify, you want to have your little hygiene kit. This has a razor in it, like napkins, etc. You want to have a stress ball. How many of y'all know that going through a flood is very stressful? It's very stressful. I mean, the Lord knows it's stressful. You got to have a stress ball. And maybe this stress ball can be used in other contexts too. If you don't like the dentist, and when you go to the dentist and dentist does dental work, have you a stress ball to release your stress. When you realize that stress is real, it's good to have a stress ball to relieve it. Some people don't need it, but in case you need it, you might need a mask. And this is an N50. This is an N95 mask. So you definitely want a mask, just in case. Even and the pandemic has taught us masks are very important. You want to have a can opener, have some canned foods that, whatever your diet allows, have some canned food ready, and then have a can opener. You want to have matches that are waterproof, waterproof matches, so you can see in the house, wherever you are. You want to have an emergency survival blanket. You definitely want to have an emergency survival blanket. and you want to have gloves. Never know when you need gloves, so you want to have gloves. So these are really relevant for flooding. And again, imagining the worst case scenario that it may take a couple hours, maybe a couple days, that you might be in the house, you can't go out because it's flooded. And we know that flooding will be a problem, and it is a problem in Framingham. And 911 is just overwhelmed with trying to get to everybody, and it may take a while to get to you.
Big thank you to Reverend Walker for speaking with us today, for giving us some great ideas. I think C.R.E.W is really interesting. I like their motto, education, service, and planning. And if it weren't COVID, I would be like, let's get together and make these emergency kits and give them out. It takes a lot more planning, obviously, with COVID. So as Helen said, I'm Amy Puelka. I'm the lead for Energize Framingham, which is an online community resource for our community, where you can find different actions to help with the resilience of your community, as well as the resilience of your home. So one of the things that we didn't talk about is how you can make your home prepared for an emergency before those heat waves happen, which is through insulation or for power outages. Any sort of way to make your home more efficient will make what resources you have go further during emergencies. So there's a lot of actions available there. There are reviews from your neighbors. We talked about meeting your neighbors. So if you are thinking you want to do one of these actions, but you don't know where to start, I have another resource coming up for you. But let's say you're like Joan and you're just moving into Framingham. Where can I get the local farm share? You can go on Energize Framingham to see reviews. Obviously, Facebook, other places also have those. The fun thing here is that they relate to a specific action. And you can join a team. I have shown here the Framingham High School Environmental Club. We've had a number of interns from that club help us out in creating this resource for Framingham. It's at energizeframingham.org, and I'm happy to answer any questions. This is a product from a couple of groups in Framingham, the Earth Day Committee, Sustainable Framingham, a number of environmental groups. So I'm happy to chat with people about questions, et cetera. And Helen, if you would go to the last slide, skip this one. There you go. So I mentioned making your home more energy efficient. If you are interested in doing that, I have a great news for you. The city has partnered with a nonprofit called Allen Energy to help bring the Mass Save program to Framingham residents and small businesses in an easier manner. I'm sure we're all a little familiar, or many of us have called an 800 number, it's generic. Allen Energy is much more, it's a personal touch. You can go to a website at framinghamsaves.org. They have materials right now in English and Spanish, and we're working on a Portuguese translation. So I'm also happy to answer questions about that. That's all I had. Thanks everyone for your time.